Recording is on.
In here. All right. Welcome to the July meetup of PHP Vegas. My name is Josh Copeland. I'm the user group leader out here. I've been running this user group now for, I want to say, about 5 years. And tonight we got two really cool talks. One of them is Manny Costa. He'll be speaking about what you should know as a WordPress developer. And additionally, we also have myself. I'll be giving a talk about PHP-PM. This is a pretty cool piece of technology that I just recently saw myself that I thought other people should at least hear about. And no, that's not a typo. That actually is, some people are like, you mean FPM? No, this is a different thing. It's PHP-PM. So two really great talks tonight. And at the end, we'll be raffling off a 1-month subscription to Symphony Casts, as well as a 1-year license to PHP Storm, provided by our awesome guys at JetBrains. We've been now doing, I think this is our 3rd stream due to the COVID stuff. Unfortunately, Innovation Center has been closed. We haven't been able to host it there, but hey, at least we get to now do this online and share it out with the world. So we'll be recording tonight's meetup as well. We'll post it on our YouTube channel. And if anybody does have questions, feel free to open up the chat here in Jitsi. Definitely share it out to anybody you think you'd be interested in joining in. First up, I'll go over my talk here and a demo. Hopefully that won't cause too many sparks and flames coming out of my computer after I get done with it, and open it up for questions about this technology. So let's go ahead and kick it off. So PHP-PM basically stands for Process Manager, and what it is it supercharges your PHP application. So before we get too much into exactly what it is, let me just go over who am I. My name is Joshua Copeland. I'm the CTO of Remote Dev Force. It's a software development shop. We do freelance PHP development. I've been running that now for about 5 years. And I've also been developing in PHP for 12 years and just software development in general for a little over 15 years. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've built a lot of startups, had a lot fail, but that's kind of the life of being an entrepreneur. And also, I'm a self-proclaimed computer, beep, and I'm a family man. I'm a tech lover, and I love skateboarding on some of my off time just to get some exercise and get outside and get that vitamin D. You can see my outdated blog, which I promise I'll start posting more at ogprogrammer.com, or check out my website, remotedevforce.com, if you are interested in either looking for freelance contracts or need somebody to help out with your project. Also, feel free to follow me on OG Programmer at Twitter. So, what is PHP-PM? PHP-PM is an open source process manager, and basically what it does is it supercharges your PHP applications, and it's also a load balancer. And the way that it uses, or the way that it can supercharge your PHP application is by what really underneath the hood is React PHP, which achieves event-driven, non-blocking I/O with PHP. So in layman's terms, instead of every time a request going to your server where PHP-FPM needs to go and bootstrap your application and load all of those files, PHP-PM essentially has a hot loaded version of your application ready to take requests. So it doesn't need that boot up time, and that's really where you're getting the key performance out of. There are some caveats that I personally ran into with using this, but I wouldn't be surprised if people are using this in production. I think even if it's not quite there, this is definitely the future of PHP and what you can do to write some really performant applications. So, like I said, it's based on React PHP, and it works best with applications that use a request response framework like Symfony's HTTP kernel. This approach it kills the expensive bootstrapping of PHP because it doesn't have to declare symbols, load, parsing, all those PHP files in the opcode, and basically allows your application to be loaded and ready to go to take requests. It spawns a bunch of workers just like FPM does. So you have several PHP instance workers ready with your bootstrapped application, held in memory and ready to take new incoming requests. So this is what makes PHP so fast for serving up applications, requests for your application. So in some articles I've read, it shows with PHP-PM taking like 150 requests per second and boosting that up to anywhere to 2K with PHP-PM. My benchmarks showed about 2 to 3x throughput, but I have a feeling a lot of that has to do with just my local environment, and probably, again, on a production environment, you could probably get that 15x that they claim that it could get. There is an integrated load balancer. There's also, for development reasons, a hot code reload feature. So just like when you're developing something in JavaScript or CSS, and you have an npm watch command sitting there watching for application changes or watching for changes in the assets and then rebuilding, this kind of does the same thing. It will monitor all of the PHP files. When it sees something that's changed, it will then just reload all of those PHP-PM processes. I'll call it PPM for now, just because it's a little bit shorter. But basically, that allows you to develop very quickly with this, so you don't need to use something different on your local environment for developing. And also, it can serve up static files fairly quickly. Personally, probably would want Nginx or something in front of this to serve it up and dodge PHP-PM, which would probably be a little faster, but it does have that as a feature. And like I said, it supports the HTTP kernel, which Symfony and Laravel pretty much support, and there's a bridge for that works with PHP-PM. Seems fairly stable from what I've seen and tested. And there are some experimental bridges that are out there, or I should say adapters. There's one for Drupal, one for Zen, one for Cake PHP. They're either all in alpha or beta stages right now, so they're experimental. But if you're looking to get that boost of performance and you don't want to rewrite everything in React PHP or Node, and you want just to bootstrap your application, perhaps take a look at those, and maybe you could contribute to those projects to get them to a stable state. But just know that those are out there so you can experiment with. So how do we use PHP-PM? So essentially, the easiest way to get started is, like all things in the world now, is using Docker. You can use Docker to load up PHP-PM by just running either the Symfony or the Laravel bootstrap command. So you can see here we've got -- bootstrap equals Symfony or -- bootstrap equal Laravel. That basically tells PHP-PM which adapter to use. I think by default the Symfony one, or aka the HTTP kernel, is what's loaded as that bridge and adapter. But like I said, there's experimental ones out there you can try. And then you need to tell it which directory is your web directory. And that's essentially because this is the PHP-PM Nginx flavor. There's also a PHP-PM Docker image by itself without the Nginx piece built into it. So if you want to separate that out, you can. But this is very easy to just run and get going. And I also have a demo and some examples you guys can take a look at if you want to run this yourself later. But we'll try and get to that at the end here. Here at the bottom left, we have PHP-PM Nginx. This is the actual Docker hub.
Second push one.
Let me hang on, sorry. And we also have the PHP-PM Docker GitHub here, which has great documentation as well if you actually want to build your own Docker image with PHP-PM. So let's just cover, it's not in this right here, but there is a debug flag you can pass in as well. When that debug flag is turned on, what that does is PHP-PM will be looking for PHP files that change. And when it does, it reloads all those PHP-PM processes. In production, you're not going to want that on. You're going to want debug off, so that way you get that extra performance of it not having to scan your PHP files all the time. But just know that underneath the hood, really, there's a binary called PPM. And that binary is really what launches React PHP and has all of those, has all of that built in. So here's what it looks like when you just run the ppm help command. You can see we have this bridge here that defaults to HTTP kernel. There's the bootstrap that we just covered. It says what type of bootstrap adapter to use. So essentially what framework that we're launching with PPM. And then a host and port. And this basically is defaulted to localhost and 8080, but you can change this. And like I said, this has this built-in load balancer. And then there's workers that get spawned off of this. For local development, you probably just want one, but you can default this. Essentially, you want it to equal probably the number of cores that you have in your system for the best throughput. And then the app environment, that kind of gets passed down to your application. So again, whether you want it to be dev or production or prod, excuse me, you'll pass in those flags and that'll help your application to kind of switch from prod to, from prod to, oh shoot, where's my notes? Sorry about that. Second view. Okay, sorry about that. So let's go to the next slide here. So once you actually launch the PHP-PM binary and you start it, you'll get kind of an output here that shows you what settings are currently set up for it. And then you can start to see the requests coming through for anything that gets requested to your application, essentially. So the basic features of it, like we covered earlier, you have a bridge that's defaulted to the HTTP kernel. You're more than welcome to write your own adapter to your application, but you just need some sort of request response abstraction like PSR12 or something like that that's already built in. That's why it already works with Symfony and Laravel quite easily. So let's keep going here. How do we get more performance out of PPM? There's the app environment equal prod. You're going to want that on for your production environment, as well as making sure that you don't have Xdebug or anything silly like that installed. And then you're going to want to make sure that you flip debug to 0. So this turns off the hot reload, so it's not having to search all those files. And also passing something like -- logging off. You'll probably get a little bit more performance, but you won't have any logging. So you might want to have that on, depending on how you have this set up. But we'll go over some architectures of how you probably would want to use PPM in your production environment. Again, there's the -- workers. That's what you're going to use to control what the total CPU count is. you don't want to include hyper-threading or how many threads that you could possibly have. So try to set that to how many cores you have. So I have a quad-core i7. I just set that to 4 or 5. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just enough to kind of match exactly how much cores you have to get the best performance out of PPM. To get even more performance out of it, you could try a different event loop. I haven't looked too much into this, and I won't claim that I'm a expert on asynchronous PHP, but there could be some additional benefits you could get out of looking into the React event loop and perhaps some different event loops that could be quicker for what you're doing. So I wrote up a little example. There's also a couple of other examples out there, but I noticed they're a little out of date. So I wrote up one using PHP 7.4 and Laravel 7.12. And then I ran some benchmarks myself on my local. And I will say I got more performance out of using PHP-PM. However, I didn't look too much into it. I did get some requests that bombed out. I don't know if it's because maybe Siege was letting go of the connections before it got a request, but just know that, again, you probably want to benchmark this and make sure that it's stable before you actually throw this into production. So this is basically what I have in my Docker Compose YAML inside of that GitHub project, which I'll share that in the PHP Meetup on our meetup.com page. I'll share both the slides here as well as the GitHub repo. So inside of the Docker Compose YAML, you'll see that we have this service here. And there's essentially two services that are running in this Docker Compose YAML. There's a PPM and there's also an FPM with an Nginx container. So this is basically just kind of my example setup I did so I could benchmark both running at the same time. You probably would want to actually benchmark it you know, in a production environment or whatever, but locally I just did it just for kind of understanding, you know, what kind of throughput I could get by using this. Over here I've got some dev configs, so you can see this debug =1 flag here. That's really what's saying if you see PHP files change, go ahead and reload my processes, and of course your app-env, which will throw your debug bar and all that good stuff. And then what's your public directory you want to serve up? So, you know, as you would have, there's a volume that gets mounted. So the root of this project just gets mounted over to var www. I'm using the PHP-PM Nginx flavor of this image. There are just specific ones for the PPM binary itself. That's probably what you would want to use in production and then separate out Nginx. But just as for sake of making it easy, I just use that one. And then this is the FPM. So I just kind of Googled, you know, PHP FPM Docker. I found this Bitnami image here, grabbed that FPM, and I grabbed this Nginx Bitnami. So this one I've just hosted on a different host port, 8888, instead of the 8080, which the other one is hosting 8080 on for our PPM process. And this one will be running PHP FPM, which FPM is great. You're gonna get a heck of a lot more throughput with FPM than you would be using something like mod CGI, you know, with a built-in PHP into Apache or something like that. That is kind of old school, but does offer some additional security features. Like if you use that with SU exec on a Linux box and it's like a VM with other people on the VM, you can lock that down a lot more than you could like a PHP FPM. Gets kind of messy where you'd have to have different users and such, whereas the other way is perhaps a little bit more secure. So security, again, always should be at top of mind. But for the sake of this example, here's the FPM process, and we just got a little network that bridges these two containers, and a server.conf, which is what Nginx uses to basically see what port and what else files to host up as the root directory, which is app here. So when I launch this and I run docker up -d, so it's running daemonized, I get this nice output from the PPM container. And what this tells me is what bridge and all the settings that PPM is using. So I'm using 10 workers. Again, I probably should have had that lower, but by default, I think it was set to 10. And you've got your app env, which you should have set to prod. If you're using this in a prod environment, you want to get that extra throughput. Logging is turned on. Your public directory, wherever you're hosting your static files, and how many max requests this thing could take, and then your execution time, some timeouts. So this reload timeout, perhaps this is where I was getting some of my issues, but we'll get to it in a minute, one of the cons of using this. But just know that there's a reload timeout, and when this timeout is hit, PHP-PM will just die and then relaunch itself because it assumes that the request has taken too much time and that this process has had a memory leak. And that's kind of one of the issues with this. And we'll get to that in a second. But there are probably ways you can get around that, especially if you write a really well-written application that doesn't have any memory leak. You might not have to worry about that. But 10 to 1, if you live in any normal environment, you probably have some level of memory leak. So here's kind of some of the benchmarks that I ran locally. Again, this is going to vary. Every time I ran it, I got different numbers. So, it probably just matters what time of the day, what's running on your machine, etc. But I did run this with Siege and Apache Bench just to kind of get an idea of PPM versus FPM. I've got like I mentioned, I think a 2.5 i7 Mac here with 16 gigs of RAM. I don't know how much I gave to Docker, probably like 10 or something like that, something crazy. But I don't have like that beefy of a machine. But again, I did see performance boosts between PPM and FPM. However, I think that there was memory leak after a while, perhaps with the way that I have the Laravel app set up, that there were failed transactions. And obviously in a production environment, you would want 0 failed transactions because every request matters, right? So this, with FPM, I was hitting 260 transactions, and I was getting anywhere from, let's see, the longest transaction, it was around 6 seconds. Quite long, but still it wasn't too bad compared to some of the weirdness I was getting with PPM. But I did get almost 800 requests out of PPM. So what is that, 260? That's like 2.5 times more requests or something like that I got through PPM. However, there were 15 of those transactions that failed. Again, I have a feeling that those were just unfortunate requests that hit this 30-second, memory leak timeout, and it killed those processes and relaunched. There's probably a way that you could get around that and fix that, perhaps by reloading those once memory gets up to a certain size or something. But I'm sure reaching out to that PPM project, I probably could find a reason why that was happening. But I will say, with the throughput I was getting was pretty impressive. However, it wasn't what they were claiming with the 15x, but again, it could just be the way that I have this project set up. These were pulled from blog posts that they kind of wrote. This is very old, back in 2014. However, you can see that PHP Nginx with FPM, they're claiming against PPM with 20 workers, was blowing FPM out of the water. Again, what they used for those benchmarks, I'm not quite sure. They're saying they use 7. with opcode cache. I don't think I even have op cache enabled. Maybe that's one of the reasons why things are blowing up on my machine. But there's obviously some things you could additionally tweak to get some more performance out of this. But with their Laravel 5 example, which they also do have a GitHub out there with this Laravel 5 example, you can see that PPM versus FPM, they're just getting so much more throughput. So in this example, hitting some articles, blog page sort of thing, they're getting, 491 requests. And then through this PPM, they're getting 1,300. So, I mean, quite a huge, a little over 2.5x, around there, 2.5x performance increase. So another graph here, the FPM kind of here at the bottom. Again, these are old. I'm sure there's been some better improvements in not only FPM, but with React PHP, Nginx, and all. And this has HHVM, which really, to be honest, isn't really used other than maybe by Facebook at this point. But you can see here the concurrent amount of connections that you have. There are some performance hits you start to get with React when you do get to that high concurrency level. However, it's still handling more requests than FPM is. So albeit it looks like the more requests that it gets, it has to do more shuffling, and it gets it starts to dip. I'm sure that could be handled with horizontal scaling or some other way of load balancing how many requests a particular server is getting. But as you can see, it definitely is a higher throughput than FPM is. And the memory usage, that is another con that I've seen, is React, again, over how many connections are coming through, it's having to load and hold all that application data in each one of those processes, especially when maybe one request loads a bunch of files that the next request isn't going to load. Those are just hanging out in memory, sitting there. So that's why you kind of see this steady upward trend with React, because it just holds on to that until eventually, like I said, those processes reload and it kind of clears itself out. So debugging, again, like I mentioned, if you get some strange issues in your application, you have no idea what they're coming from, try just dipping this down to one worker instead of having 8 or whatever running. There's also the verbose flags, V or double V, that you can enable to get some more output from PPM. You can also use PPM with Xdebug. Just know that PPM uses at least 2 processes. So that also means that there's going to be 2 Xdebug instances that get kicked off when you're using this thing. So with PHP Storm, there's a per default configured out the gate where it only allows you to use 1 connection at a time. So you're going to want to bump that up if you want to get Xdebug working with PHP Storm. And you can see here underneath the debug in PHP Storm, you can set that max simultaneous connection to something like 5 or whatever. That way you can debug those multiple threads coming through that PPM is running. There's a few adapters, like I mentioned in the beginning, that are out there. There's Laravel and Symfony, which seems fairly stable since it uses the HTTP kernel. There's also some experimental ones out there. There's one for Zend. There's one for Cake PHP. And there's also one out there for, that's slipping my mind now. Drupal. Yeah, that's what it is. So those are all experimental. You probably don't want to use those in production unless you really went through those adapters with a fine-tooth comb. However, there are those options out there if you are using those frameworks. If you do use this with Symfony, just remember that you're going to be behind a reverse proxy, so you just need to make sure that you set your reverse proxy IP to be trusted by Symfony. Otherwise, you'll get some errors. And I have some bad news for all you WordPress developers. but this is not going to work with WordPress. Not now, not tomorrow, probably not ever. This is due to the lack of that request response abstraction, because WordPress doesn't use something like the HTTP kernel, or to be honest, any PSRs for that matter. So it is probably not going to happen anytime soon to use something like this. Now, that's not to say WordPress couldn't eventually take advantage of maybe some of the async abilities that libevent is going to provide with PHP in the future. However, right now, probably not going to happen. So that's great. We got a whole bunch of extra requests, and PPM looks great on paper, other than maybe some of the issues that I ran into, which is memory leak. So memory leak, memory leak, memory leak. That is the #1 issue that you're going to have with this. So if your application's bloated, has a lot of memory leak, not very good garbage collection sort of things, this is going to be something that could cause issues, but it's not that big of an issue, seeing that the workers are restarted automatically once there's a timeout that reaches that 30 seconds. That's probably maybe why I was getting some of those errors. Maybe if you had the request timeout at something like 60 seconds, but then you had the restart timeout for this memory leak issue at 30, that way it can maybe still serve up the response before it went and restarted. That might be a workaround or something like that. But again, I'm not an expert in using PPM. This is kind of experimenting with it. So you'd have to kind of try yourself and figure that piece out. This doesn't work with the extension event loop, so don't install PHP event, but you can try the lib event loop. Those apparently will work. Again, I don't know 100% all about that, but that's some of what was in the documentation. Drupal and Laravel, Drupal and Zend and the Cake PHP are very experimental and not fully working. You can see most of the issues that those have by just going and looking at their GitHub. You'll see things like CSRF or like cookies aren't quite working. So perhaps you could look at ways of fixing that if you did want to use something like this. The Laravel debugger also isn't working perfectly since it still needs to reset some stuff after each request. So that could be an issue. But again, maybe you don't need that because you're just looking to use this in production. Also, streamed responses are not streamed yet, and there's no Windows support due to the way that signal handling works. So sorry, Windows users. So how you probably want to set this up in production if you did decide to experiment with it or even use it is, you have all of your clients making a request over to an Nginx server or maybe multiple servers or a load balancer or whatnot in front of your PHP application. And then you would load essentially your React PHP load balancer, this PPM process, and it would launch a bunch of workers, which are those PHP forks, and those would be what's serving up your application. So when you have a static file that gets requested, you're not hitting any of this PHP stuff. You just go and make that local file system request. But if you do get a PHP request, that's when you go ahead and hit your React PHP or PPM process there. And essentially that's going to be running all these asynchronous, hot-loaded, bootstrapped applications, so you don't have to have that heavy load of loading your application every time. So demo time. Let's try and break some stuff. So let me go ahead and pull up my demo here. I need to make this smaller. Put this over here. So here you have the Laravel application that I just loaded, which has PHP 7.2, it looks like. I thought I was using 7.4, but I could be wrong. I could be using something like 7.2. That's probably just because I'm using 7.3 locally. But you can see I've got Laravel 7.12 installed here. This is the Docker Compose YAML. This is what's using the PPM Nginx. And this is also what's using the FPM. So to kick it off, you can go and take a look at the README, which has some instructions on how to use this thing. So as long as you got Docker Compose installed, and then you can install something like Siege or Apache Bench with Brew and use some of these commands here to do some load tests against your local or remote environment or wherever. And to launch this, we just simply need to run this Docker Compose up, which I think I've already got this running, but let's go ahead and take a look here. Just bring it all down. So we'll run Docker Compose up -d. I just passed a -- build flag just because I was making a lot of changes to this and wanted it to have the freshest files. And we can tail our logs here, and you can see here's kind of our PPM output. That tells us exactly what information is being loaded for the PPM binary. So, we can take 1,000 max requests. Here's that max execution time and that reload timeout. Those, again, you probably want to play with. You could probably find some articles on better tuning that. But anyway, so we've also got our FPM process that loaded here along with Nginx. So if we take a look at the Docker Compose, we can see that the PPM process is running on 8080, and then we've got our Nginx with FPM running on 8888. So if we want to do some load tests now, let's go ahead and I'll copy my command from the README here. First, let's load test the FPM container. So we're going to be running 10 concurrent connections and 1,000 requests. This will take a bit, but we can launch another terminal here. Paste that in, and it's benchmarking. So while that's running, let's just go take a look real quick. I want to show you one thing here, part of this example. Everything in here, like I said, it's just a Laravel 7.12 example. There is a couple of files I added. I added this Docker Compose YAML, which obviously has PPM and FPM that we just went over. There's also this server.conf. This is the Nginx configuration. So this is what's telling it what the root public directory is and what, Docker container to look at for FPM. But this is just a really simple example to use like Nginx and FPM with that Bitnami package there. So those are really kind of the only bits that I added on top. The .env I just went and committed just because there's nothing that secret in there. I just copied the example over. So you can just clone this down, run composer install, and then you can test this out yourself once you bring the Docker containers up. So something happened. That didn't look good. Hang on, let's try that again. Maybe closing that caused issues. So Apache Bench is doing its thing here. If we look at the logs here, you can kind of see it rolling. All these new requests coming in because Apache Bench is just blasting it. So again, we're testing the FPM one first here. And just to kind of double check ourselves, the configurations for PPM I've got set to a little bit higher than I should, actually. I've got 20 workers, no logging, prod, and debug flag off, so it's not checking for any file changes to reload the processes. In reality, I probably should lower that. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little bit more errors than we did last time. But We shall find out. So with FPM, I was able to get, here's kind of, I think, the main number I'm interested in, how many requests per second. About 15 and a half requests per second I was getting with the FPM process. If I run a Docker PS here, just kind of show you what's running. It's these 3 containers. We've got our PHP-PM Nginx container, and then these 2 containers here kind of attached to each other for FPM, serving up FPM. So now let's go ahead, let's try to do an Apache bench against our PPM process. So I'll kick that off, and now we could start to see, probably, oh, I have logging turned off, so we probably won't see anything there in the logging. But again, that's probably why you would want to put Nginx in front of this and have PPM as a separate process, because you don't want this container doing too much. Just have the PPM do its job and then throw native Nginx in front of it or something like that to serve up the request, and not even bother hitting PHP if it's a static file like CSS or a JavaScript file that's being requested. So this feels like it's going a little faster than the FPM was, so that's probably good news. So we're almost there. Come on. Come on, 1,000. Big bucks, no whammies. Almost. Almost. Come on. Oh, that's always the last 100 that takes forever, huh? So I'm getting 15 requests per second through, which I think is the same. That's probably not good. And I bet that has to do with the fact that I have 20 workers running. Let me see if lowering that down will do anything. Let's run 5. And let's reload that. A lot of other stuff going on too, like streaming and all this other stuff. So that might be a reason why we're getting the same benchmarks. But I did include some benchmarks that I ran before I had all this stuff running. And you can see with Apache Bench, I was getting, with PPM, about 11 requests per second. And then FPM, I was getting about 6 requests per second. So it was about double. And then with Siege, I was getting, with 30 seconds, just running as many requests I could during that 30 seconds, about 800. And there was 260 with the FPM process next to it. Let me try this one more time and see if we can get a different number there. All right, 80. Let's try that again. And like I said, by no means, oh, shoot, I should not have ran that. Did it kill it? Stop. This is why live demos are never fun. No, they're both up. Okay. So this was, I think, a part of the reason I was getting some of these dead requests with Siege, perhaps even Apache Bench is hitting some of those. Essentially, I think it's like where PPM hits some certain threshold and then just decides to restart the process. So again, you probably have to really set up PPM properly. The good thing is you can actually create a config file for PPM. You don't have to pass in all of these flags. You can set an environment variable to tell it what config file to take a look at and then mount that over into the container. So there's ways that you could kind of set this up to where you don't have to have all these crazy flags going in. They just recently, and we'll get to that here in a second, but React PHP isn't necessarily still being maintained as much as I'd like. Their 1.0, I guess, or you'd say stable release was about a year ago, but there hasn't been any new tags released since then. I'm not sure if that's due to just maybe not a lot of development going on in it, or perhaps there's another framework out there that's doing a little more than it is. But that is one thing to note, that again, the stuff probably could just be that there needs to be a little bit more development put into some of these things to smooth out some of these bugs. But yeah, so we're getting seven requests per second. Again, it's not really the numbers I was looking for, but it's probably because I've got a ton of stuff running here. But I encourage you to go ahead and pull this down, run your own benchmarks, play around with it, and you could probably see that you'll get about 2x between FPM and PPM. But you got to play with some of those settings to kind of get it just right compared to how many cores you have. So let me go back here to the slides. There's just this last conclusion slide here pretty much. So just to wrap things up and recap, this React PHP, hasn't had a new release in over a year. So that's one thing to take into consideration. However, this is kind of the future of PHP if PHP is to stay relevant and keep up with technologies like Node and other, non-blocking I/O sort of languages that are out there. So one big thing that's still kind of a problem, obviously, since you've got the whole application bootstrapped and all of these requests going through, is memory leak. So that's something that you need to make sure that your app is stable before you go and obviously push this into production. And maybe you even consider rewriting parts of your application in React Native or Node.js. But just be aware that with this sort of callback behavior, you can run into callback hell, as what it's called. So, there's some trade-offs that you have with asynchronous applications. So I'm going to open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
I don't have a question as much as just to kind of add something to what you were saying earlier. Is I think the reason why the development for React PHP is kind of slowed down is just due to the fact that there's better tools out there that are kind of coming out, like Swool. And I believe I've heard that there's somebody else that's trying to do the same thing that Swool's doing, but in a more PHP-like syntax rather than trying to kind of rip off Go with PHP syntax. But I haven't heard very much about that other than like one Reddit post. But yeah, Swool is definitely the one that's taking the lead on this asynchronous PHP style programming.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I've heard a lot about Swool and some talks around it. So perhaps maybe even somebody, either creates a new sort of PPM sort of thing that, is like Swool, that can kind of take advantage of that HTTP kernel and do the same thing here. But I will say this thing does work. It just probably needs a little bit more TLC before it's production ready. However, it's definitely impressive, the numbers I was getting, just kind of messing around with it shortly here. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been driving, so I haven't been really watching the screen, but you mentioned quite a few times that this is kind of a new technology, but then you mentioned one article that I think you said was 2014.
Yeah.
Where it was comparing it to FPM.
Yeah.
So, I mean, has it really been out since 2014 and they're just not ready yet?
No, well, it just, like I said, last year, so what's that, 2019, React PHP finally got its 1.0 stable tag. So technically speaking, React is now stable. When this first came out in 2014, it was just kind of the new hot topic. And a lot of articles came out about PPM. So since then, it has had a lot of traction. And I think even looking at the repo, there was like somebody that changed something 20-something odd days ago. So PPM itself still seems to be under development. It's more of React PHP, which is under the hood of PPM, that seems to have slowed down. So I've heard people use this in production. In fact, one of my clients was even kind of like urging that we should look into this. However, again, you just need to probably load test your application first, just to make sure that you don't have some crazy memory leaks where this thing just basically restarts itself every time you have a request coming in, because then you lose all the benefits of having your application bootstrapped and ready to take requests if it's having to restart the application on every request. So again, you're going to have to just kind of test it with your application in order to see if your application will work well with a technology like this. Otherwise, FPM is probably going to be your best bet anyway. So that's just from what I've heard. And yes, it's been around now for about 5 or 6 years, so it's stable enough. Any other questions? Alrighty. Well, again, I'm Joshua Copeland. Appreciate you all listening to me blabber on about this. I just wanted to mention that at Remote DevForce, I'm looking for freelancers that want to do Symfony and Laravel work. Got a lot of work there. So if you do have experience, feel free to reach out to me at Josh@Remote DevForce. And I appreciate everybody's time. So thank you. All right. So the next talk we have coming up is Manny. He's going to be covering a very interesting topic for WordPress developers. It's basically what you should know as a WordPress developer and learn. And Manny here, I've known him for quite some time. He's a very prominent figure here in the PHP Vegas tech community. He's also co-organized our meetup for quite some time, and we appreciate having him. So I'll hand things off to you, Manny, and
thank you, Josh.
Everybody give a nice warm welcome to Manny.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me fine? Do you hear me fine?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you, Cody. So, all right, let me share my screen here. Here you go. All right. So, I've been doing a lot of WordPress development since 2010, and this is a topic that I actually gave this presentation like 2 weeks ago at the Las Vegas WordPress Meetup. And I think it's kind of interesting, this, because one thing that we know is this is technology. It's always evolving, so you have always to keep up to date with things. So today I'm going to talk about what is a WordPress developer and what is the required knowledge and technology that WP developers know or try to learn. And spoiler alert, it's quite a long list. And how to become a better WordPress developer. As Josh said, I'm Emanuel, Manny Costa. I'm known as Manny, and I'm originally from Brazil. So hashtag embrace the accent. And the good thing I have slides so you guys can read the closed captions here. And feel free to ask questions on the chat anytime. Interrupt me. And this is kind of, I think. Let me talk a little bit about me. So I'm a WordPress enthusiast. I've been doing web development since 1993. As I said, in 2010, I started doing a lot of WordPress stuff. And I also co-organized 2 other meetups, the online marketing, the WordPress meetup, and this meetup here with Josh. I organized a WordCamp. WordCamp is a WordPress local event, and I was the main organizer in 2016 Brazil. Organized last year's Meetup. Unfortunately, due to the COVID, we canceled this year. We don't have WordCamp to 2020 in Vegas this year. I am Chief Everything Officer at my company, High Tech Web Inc. I currently work as a web developer and digital marketing consultant for multiple clients. And a disclaimer before we start. This presentation is based on my personal experience, and I'm by no means an expert on everything that I'm going to talk here. On the contrary, I'm just like a stalker of the new technology and stuff that I see here. And the idea of this meetup, actually, this presentation came from a meetup I saw in Brazil like 2 months ago. And you can find me everywhere I am. I don't know if this, let me see if I can hide this. No way I can hide this. Yeah, I can't hide. I wish I could hide this. So let's start with this. Now, what is a WordPress developer? And I did some research on Google, and I changed some wording, but this is what I came up with. WordPress development is a profession that is based on the infrastructure of PHP programming. But furthermore, it requires a deep understanding of WP Core, the WP library, and other technology best practices, including the web triad, to produce great WP-based plugins. And to develop cutting-edge WP plugins or themes and making them work properly in all environments while overcoming basic conflict, which is very common with popular themes and plugins, we need a vast amounts of WP knowledge and a great amount of PHP skills, which are often underestimated by the common WP user, which is a big difference between a WordPress developer and a WordPress user, right? So another disclaimer, this list is under constant update. So if you want to share anything, any new technology, anything that you think is related to this, please feel free to reach out and let me know so I can add to this list. So let's start this. The basics, right? What I call the web triad. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I'm going to go deeper into this. So HTML, what do we have to do? Do you guys can hear me? So I got a notice here from the Jitsi.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, cool. So on HTML, I also have links for everything here. So HTML5 is very important for you to learn, and very important also to do semantic HTML. Add before, back in the day, we used to add like a bunch of tables to do layouts in HTML. So now it's very important to have semantic HTML, and also semantic HTML has a big impact in HTML for SEO. And it's very important to understand about schema markup, right? For instance, if you are doing an e-commerce website, make sure that you have the right schemas. Helps a lot, rank your website up on Google. And on the second one, for the web triad, I have the CSS you have today. I think it's imperative to understand responsive elements. Most of my websites is like 70, 80%, and up to 95% of mobile users. So I think it's extremely important to understand this, and also to understand, CSS grid, Flexbox, and I have links. As I said, I have links for everything. Understand preprocessors, like SAS, CSS code stylings like OCSS, MaxCSS, Ben, and CSS frameworks, like Bootstrap. It's very important for you to understand this kind of stuff. And actually, I don't know if you guys agree with me. Maybe Cody doesn't agree with me, but most recently I've been having a lot of trouble with Firefox. Back in the day, IE, Internet Explorer, was like the worst for us to make things to work there. So recently I've been having a lot of struggle to make things work on Firefox. On JavaScript, Matt Mullenweg, which is the creator of WordPress, a couple years ago, I think 2-3 years ago, he gave like a talk at the WordCamp US where he said that you have to learn JavaScript deeply because they are investing a lot into this. especially React. And I'm going to talk about that later. And here I have a link for that, for his blog post. All those stuff, I have links for you to go later on and read more about this. So back to this. Okay, yeah. So learn about jQuery. jQuery is still built in. A lot of people hate jQuery, but it's still built into WordPress. So you gotta learn that. And also the new ECS and ECMAScript is very important. You can do a lot more with Java than playing JavaScript than before with this. And it's very important to understand about GOOP, structured data, JSON LD, and it's actually important for SEO. And that is a very popular plugin on the WordPress ecosystem called Yoast for SEO, and they actually do use this for SEO. It's very interesting. And as I said, React mainly because WordPress Automatic, which is the company behind WordPress, is investing a lot of that. But it's also interesting to understand other JavaScript frameworks like Vue.js and Angular. So next, this is what I came up with this WordPress technical domain. And what I say is the WordPress requirements, PHP requirements, WordPress itself, local development standards, and versioning. So WordPress requirements, you have to have Apache or Nginx. Doesn't run on IIS. Well, actually, you could try to walk around, but I recommend that. And learn about to know how to manage the htaccess file and the config files on Nginx and Apache. Learn a little bit about database servers like MySQL and MariaDB. You have to have a database server behind WordPress. It's important to understand SQL queries, but you should never write queries directly into the database because the way that WordPress works. And now PHP 7.3 Plus is the recommended version of PHP for WordPress. This actually changed recently. There was 5.6 a while ago, and they changed this. And I highly recommend to run your websites on HTTPS using Let's Encrypt. So now PHP, as we know, it's 25 years old. It's object-oriented since version 5. So there is a bunch of good security practice. And performance on 7.4 is amazing. I love it. Big difference. So the WordPress system, this is where you have good WordPress developers. They master this. So they understand very well the file structure and hierarchy, how this works, And I love this graphic here. Where is it? Let me get there. Did I get stuck here? Okay, here you go. This has really helped me understand how the requests works, when you do WordPress developing, So you could create a theme just with index.php. But if you want to, go deeper or want a specific page for the post, so you do a single. If a specific page for page. So if you have a singular, it will load for those two pages, And if you don't have one, if you have a home, it's going to load the home, not this index.php, and so on, So this helped me a lot to understand how the templates work, and the hierarchy. So it's not mandatory, but it's actually important also to understand a little bit like directories and DB model. Never, never, ever change any code into the WP admin or the WP includes, only the files inside the WP content folder. And also, there is also here a graphic that is really interesting about the database model for WordPress. Very interesting to understand. Everything is based on this. The how can I say, the metadata tables here. So everything is actually running around those tables, which some people think it's good, some people think it's bad because at some time it gives you flexibility to create different pages, custom post types. But at the other hand, performance-wise could be a problem. If you have recently, I've been doing work on a website, a WooCommerce website, that those guys have like 1 million products, and it's a pain in the neck. That is how we have to do a lot of caching behind that for that to work. So this is also extremely important to understand: hooks, actions, and filters. And here I have a link for a great presentation on WordPress.tv. This is also like an underutilized resource from WordPress. There is a bunch of great presentations on this website called WordPress.tv. Amazing, great content here. So it's very important for you to understand this, how it works, and how you can change stuff, how you can filter content, how you trigger actions. And actually, one thing that I did that helped me a lot, I think like 3 years ago, Josh got me hooked up with PHP Storm, and I was able to debug WordPress from first line, and step into the code and learn, oh, now this event is triggered, now this event triggered. WordPress is an event-based system. Is event-oriented, I would say. So understanding those hooks, actions, and filters is very important. So as I said, I think version 2.9 in 2009-10, they come up with this concept of custom post type. Everything around content on WordPress comes from custom post type. Let's say if you have a book library, right, that you want to have on your website. If you want to have like a books instead of posts and pages, you can create this books custom post type and work around that, based on that. Back in the day, I remember back in 2005, I started blogging, and I took a look at WordPress and a bunch of other CMSs out there, and I wasn't impressed. But then I revisited them in 2010. I saw that custom post type was implemented. So I said, oh, now it's a totally different game. No, it was a game changer for me, this custom post type stuff. And also, it's important for you to understand about taxonomies, all the categories, tags, and all that, in WordPress. There is a bunch of functions built in WordPress, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I highly recommend you take a look at those before you actually do your own functions, because it could be that it's already built into WordPress, so you can take advantage of this. And also a bunch of generic concepts like database connection stuff and all that. Recently, the WP REST API and the WP CLI made also WordPress extremely powerful. Let me give you one example of the REST API. I'm using the REST API to connect to another legacy system and validate customers and then let them into WordPress, all through the WordPress REST API. And one quick tip here, if you want to use the WP REST API, I recommend you, it's built into WordPress, but it's based on a plugin, and they always try the new functions and the new features first on the plugin, then they incorporate into the built-in code. And the WP CLI is amazing. It's awesome. And since most of us here are not afraid of the CLI, I do a lot of stuff with the WP CLI, and it's extremely powerful. You could quickly dump the database from live production, run some CH scripts. And let me see if I can show you really quick here from one example. Here's one example of stuff that I did. I do a dump of the database live. Then I connect to my local environment, and I run a WP CLI right here. You see, I'm using WP search replace. It's a WP CLI command to replace the stage domain name with my local environment. So this is kind of stuff, and you should always do this and not use it like changing the WP options entry, because WordPress saves data in a serialized way into the database. So you may have lots of trouble if you just change those two fields into the WP options table. Highly recommend you run this instead. Like as I showed here, this command here. So what else? Gutenberg is recently they changed the WordPress backend editor to Gutenberg, and it seems like I'm not a huge fan of Gutenberg, but it seems like they are investing a lot of this, and it's a lot of people working on this, you know. And actually, Josh gave a presentation interesting. I'm gonna link them later on. Most recently, what I've been actually, Cody gave a presentation, GraphQL, a while ago, right? Cody, was it you? Someone gave a presentation on, right?
It was Alex that did it.
Alex? Yeah. So he gave a presentation on GraphQL, and after that, I also, this is interesting. I may, you know, there is maybe something in WordPress related to that, and so I'm currently actually studying about this because I think there is a lot of great usage for this. Okay, so you also have to have a good local development environment, you know, and I highly recommend have a specific environment per project, of course. And back in the day, since I'm old school, I used MAMP, WAMP, XAMPP, and all that, but then I evolved to VVV, but it's kind of like a pain to maintain this. And then I went to local by Flywheel, which is very easy to use if you have someone that is just starting. I recommend you them to use this local by Flywheel. But as Josh said, Docker now is like the default for local environments, you know, and even in production too. So I'm using Docker for everything on my WordPress stuff. An IDE is very important. Like as I said, I think 3 years ago, I started using PHP Storm, and changed my life completely because it pushes me to be a better coder. And as I said, I debugged WordPress from line 1. One day I was bored and let me see what they have it, and then I stepped into the code from line 1 all the way to the end, you know, a vanilla website. Recently, VS Code has have a lot of attention. I played around with it. It's free. I have it on my machine here, but I'm not 100% on this, and I still like PHP Storm a lot better. One other thing that actually I gave a presentation on this a while ago, browser sync. It's if you do front end stuff, you must have this. And actually, let me see. Yeah, it's running right here. So this is one of my clients, and they want like this differently from like multiple different resolutions. So I use browser sync to actually, you can see here, it listens to my CSS changes and then automatically refresh my page. But not only this, but I also have here a phone and a tablet. So it refreshes everything on my network at the same time, so I can see actually what I'm browsing on 3 different devices, you know. And you can also have this into multiple screens too. If you have multiple monitors, you can have like different sizes, so you can see how it looks like. Highly recommend use browser sync on your local development. What else? So one thing that a lot of people don't give much attention, but actually I think this makes you a good developer into any stuff that you do, is coding standards, right? So WordPress has its own CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and PHP coding standards. So, and they have a very good and updated handbooks on all of this. So highly recommend you take a look at this, you know. And this is makes easier for other people to read your code, right? If they start doing this, if they inherit your code, or if you work together with someone else in your project, I think this is really interesting to follow those standards. Also, if you are a plugin developer, highly recommend you take a look at this. I'm a little bit freaky, you know, related to security. I have never been hacked. I say that, but it's not because I am good. It's just because I'm a freak, and also it may happen to me someday too. You know, we all make mistakes, right? So, sorry, my dog is barking here. So highly recommend you actually read about plugin security before you develop your plugin, and especially if you put that in the public repository. One thing that helped me a lot, and I tell this not only from the coding perspective, but also from the business perspective. If you do have a WordPress plugin, make sure that you make the plugin translator ready, because you can multiply your users by 10 or more just by having it ready to translate. And anyone can translate a WordPress plugin for you, even like for free. They will do it for you. If you ask them at the community, they will translate your plugin, and you have like your plugin running on multiple languages. So the way that they do this is very interesting. What else? Version control systems. Extremely important to know this. You have to have a little bit of knowledge of Subversion, even though it's like kind of outdated. But since WordPress is now from 2005, they still have it running their official repo on Subversion, so you have to learn a little bit about this. But the most used, and you have to know and learn GitHub and Bitbucket, actually the two most popular repos. Highly recommend you understand this, how it works, and not only that, but the Git workflow, right? What else? One thing that actually helped me a lot is the WP community, and it's huge. It's probably the largest community out there. As I mentioned before, WordPress TV is amazing. They have a official WordPress Slack channel and a bunch of different categories there for you to go from core to plugin developer to coding to documentation, translation, a bunch of different stuff. If you are local here, I highly recommend you join the WP Vegas Meetup. We also have a Slack, kind of active, and so highly recommend that. And why join the community? Because a lot of what I learned, it was like I felt like stepping on the shoulders of giants, right? Learning from each other people. There is a great WP Vegas Facebook group. The WordPress official forum, if you have any kind of questions, I ask you to actually use the official forum, because you not only get like really good support, but also you can help other people by using this official forum, so other people can have the same issue that you are having and learn from that. There is a bunch of WordPress Facebook groups, and actually there is a group for groups on Facebook. So if you go on this link, there are so many, there is like thousands of groups of WordPress groups on Facebook. So this guy came up with an idea to have the list of good Facebook WordPress groups on Facebook. What else? So now I'm going to talk about if you want to really be a good developer, you want to go the extra mile, right? So what is the extra mile for me? The extra mile would be learn how to optimize, LAMP and stacks. Learn. This is, like, as I said, extremely important. I use Redis for this client, but they as I mentioned before, they have 1 million products, and without Redis it would be like impossible to do it. And I am by no means an expert on all of this, CD and CI, and DevOps. I think it's extremely important, especially if you do like websites that have like hundreds of thousands of hits or multiple concurrent users. It's important for you to have something like this to learn how to scale using Elastic Computing, EC2, and Elastic Beanstalk on AWS. And actually, if you want to play around with this, I recommend you take a look at this. AWS, they have a tutorial here on how to run a WordPress website with on Elastic Beanstalk. So this is what I do when I have a client that have like thousands of concurrent users on the same website. What else? Most recently, and this, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, Google announced the Web Vitals, and there is a lot of information out there, but this is the most comprehensive guide I've seen so far on how performance impacts into your rankings. So highly recommend you take a look at this if you want to have your clients rank better. Highly recommend this. Not directly related to WordPress, but it's development, like web development. And nowadays I almost make a requirement if a customer wants to work with me to use BugHerd, because as we know, if we are working on front end stuff, back and forth stuff, information by email or on Slack or chat, it's not a good thing. So if you have not used BugHerd, highly recommend using BugHerd. You could use other stuff, Asana, Trello, but BugHerd for me is like amazing, and I love it. And the way that it works is it creates like a layer on top of your website, and then they can have screenshots. You can see like different resolutions, the resolution that they are using, the kind of browser, the kind of operating system, and they can enter comments there how to about issues that you have. So this is the end of the list, and if you don't know that already yet, how to learn this all, and for us, for the seasoned senior developers, because we've been exposed to this for so long, it's not as difficult. But if you are beginning on this, it's kind of tough. So I recommend you to take a big breath and start small. You could do just start your personal blog about stuff like how do you solve a problem, what did you learn. And this, I think, actually helped a lot of people. If you just say simple stuff, how I solve this problem, I solved like doing this and that. And the WordPress ecosystem has, the WordPress developers, they have a tag on their repo called "Good First Bugs." So if you never ever contributed to WordPress, you could come here, learn about this good first bugs, and fix them, and then just give back to WordPress. It's open source software, right? So you can give back to them, and you could learn by that too, because you're gonna get feedback, from senior developers on how the right way to do stuff. So those are like really good starting point for you to be involved into the community. You can create a single plugin and share. Sharing your plugin, I think, is one of the good. I only have one plugin on the repo, and actually it's kind of outdated. But by developing that plugin, I learned a lot. Getting feedback from people and all that. And remember, when you do develop a plugin, you're gonna get a lot of support requests. There is a really good article here, if you are new to plugin development. And the next step, I think, is a little bit harder, is to create a theme and create a good and bad block recently. And actually, as I mentioned before, Josh has a really good talk from WordCamp Vegas 2019 on this subject, how to do plugin development into the good and bad world, Alrighty. So next, now I would like to have an open discussion, and you guys, feel free to unmute yourselves, and we talk about how to become a good WordPress developer, or even talk how to become a good PHP developer, right? Because we said that it's almost like the same. And also, I think in my case, I'm going to start this, and then I want to hear your opinions on this. The way that I did is I identified good WordPress developers in the community, and then I stalked them, and I also read the code that they have. There is amazing plugins out there on the repo. I think over like 60,000 plugins there. And so it's hard to find the right ones, the good ones, the well written and well commented. I think there are plugins there that one of the things that I see that the guy is really good developer is when they have like more comments than code. You can see a lot more comments in the actually lines of code explaining everything that he's doing. So how about you? How about you, Josh? What do you think is how to become a good PHP developer? How to become a good WordPress developer? What do you think?
I mean, you know, one real important thing for me is, you know, understanding. There's the common mistake of when you first start developing, you know, the Stack Overflow copy paste kind of mentality. That can result in something working fairly quickly, but the negative is if you don't understand what that solution is actually doing, you're doing yourself an injustice, because sometimes, you know, maybe it backfires on you somehow, or perhaps understanding it better would lead to a better way to doing it. And I think a key thing too is just learning how to use a proper debugger. A lot of people fall into the trap of using logs, var dumping, stuff like that. Using that, you know, whether it's VS Code or PHP Storm, just using Xdebug, even in JavaScript, you know, with the console logger, like trying to debug things the old school way of like logging out, like what you can do, and I find myself in that trap sometimes too, but you know, when you really need to do some complex stuff, like it is gonna cost
doesn't help.
Yeah, than doing that. So
yeah, I agree. I wrote down here. I'm gonna add you know, that to learn Xdebug and integrate that into PHP Storm or something like that. Yeah, that helped me a lot. I remember when you gave this presentation like 3 years ago about Xdebug.
Oh yeah. I actually just gave it again recently to a group over in Estonia. Like, it's still relevant to today, like using Xdebug, you know, and you know, so. But one thing, thinking a little bit about WordPress and some of the challenges that I ran into, is just the documentation is good, but the sheer amount of functions and things that are available to you in WordPress can be overwhelming.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, how do you find yourself? Do you just kind of Google search or go through that like top 20 list you showed earlier, or like,
yeah.
How do you? Is there like maybe forums or something you can reach out to, or?
Yeah, one of the things is I think like 80% of the time you use like 20% of the functions, you know. So you don't have to learn all the functions that are out there. Just be aware that there are functions out there, and then do a quick search before you actually, oh, let me create a function, let's say for curl or something like that, right? To connect to a remote HTTP, do a remote HTTP connection or something like that, you know. So they do have this kind of stuff already built in. You know?
I don't know.
Who else is Cody? I would like to have your input on this too, man.
It's a really tough question, but something that I know like really gave me my aha moment, and unfortunately I'm going to admit something, is it took me 5 years of being a developer before I figured it out, is really get to understand the basics of logic, right? Because like a lot of us, we stumble upon getting stuck on what programming language should we learn. But in all actuality, it's most languages end up being the same, but you know, with different syntax, but you're still going to end up solving the problems pretty much the same way. It's just the way you think through it. And I also kind of take that into whenever I've actually developed a WordPress plugin, is I've kind of discovered that everyone has the same tools available to them. And the question really comes to mind of, should I be building this plugin, or is there already a plugin out there that already does this task? And that's what I'll do for clients. But don't let that discourage you from experimenting. So if there is already a plugin out there that does exactly what you want to do, just go ahead and build it anyway in your free time. so that way you can get a better understanding of how WordPress works.
Yeah, and you could always, because of the license, the WordPress is GPL, you could always fork it, right? Fork it, and you could try to do a pull request. If they don't accept it, then do a fork it and do it whatever, because you are allowed to do that kind of stuff. No, I think that is something that actually helped me a lot to learn, because if you want to be a part of someone else's code, you have to, and they enforce those rules of coding standards. You have to. You're gonna become a better developer by doing that kind of stuff, instead of being on your own, let's say own world, doing this stuff. Oh, I do this because I like this. Actually, you have to, if you want to work in a team, and we did this. We did work in a team before. We know that it's important to understand each other's code and this kind of stuff, right? So, anyone else want to give an input?
Yeah, I like the idea you said you open pull requests to other people's plugins or tools in general, because honestly, I worked at quite a few different companies now, and it really seems like, as far as working at a big company or a startup, a lot of times you have time pressure, and people, yes, you get code reviews, but they also understand, hey, we got to get this out the door. So if it works, just push it, And an open source project, they don't usually have a time rush, and they also, they have a lot of love, or whatever you want to call it, for their code base. So they want the standards to be met, and they want to make sure everything that goes in is good. So I wouldn't say prefer it, but I mean, you definitely should try to get into some open source if you have the time to do it.
Yeah, and that's not only for WordPress, but to anything, any open source project out there, right? And the second thing that you said, I don't judge other people's code because of that, because I know sometimes there are like time constraints, and you are being pushed and under pressure to do stuff, and then you have to do it quickly. So I don't judge, especially when I inherit someone else's code.
Yeah, definitely. Like I just, I'm a self-taught guy. So when I started working at this place that had about 200 developers working at it, it's a pretty big company, and I just expected, everybody there is going to be, like a superstar, rock star coder, and I walked into a huge mess, it definitely, that's how it is.
Josh.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
All righty. So I want to wrap up with saying two of my favorite quotes. Live as if you were die tomorrow, learn as if you were live forever, from Mahatma Gandhi. And the other one is tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, and involve me and I learn. That's why I said, it's really good for you to be involved into the community, doing, working on a plugin together with someone else, because you're going to be involved into that code, when you monitor, let's say, or even just like monitoring the WooCommerce development, like a big, huge plugin development. If you just watch that plugin on WordPress, on GitHub, and it's there, it's free, so everyone can take a look at that and follow the development process. I think that that helps a lot. This presentation slides are available at this link, bit.ly PHP Vegas WP developers. It's case sensitive. And thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Anyone else?
On the same thing you're talking about, being a good developer, I definitely feel like learning a framework on top of a content management system, like CodeIgniter. I read CodeIgniter a lot, and I used to take pieces of CodeIgniter and kind of play with them and figure them out. But there's a lot of framework code out there that kind of you can bootstrap into your applications without having to tango with the 11 million lines of code that is WordPress. So but then again, I mean, if you want to dive into WordPress, I think that it really gives you such a big toolbox that I find that reading framework code makes more sense to me sometimes. And even if you're a JavaScript programmer, like jQuery or Angular would be a JavaScript equivalent of coding that in, or Laravel.
Sure. Yeah, that goes into the realm that I said as open source. If you are into the open source world, right? The code is out there for you to read and to dive into it and learn by other. What I say is you step on other people's shoulders, right? On giant shoulders. You are like getting the help from those guys that have been doing this for a lot longer than us. Alrighty. So thank you very much, guys. Again, the link's right here. If you guys want to share this, feel free, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Manny.
Thank you.
I have one question. That bug herd thing, does that work with any site, or is that a WordPress site?
But I can show you. Let me show you. I love this thing, man.
I think I asked you about this last time, actually.
Yeah, let me share my screen again. I'm going to show you a real case scenario here. So this is the back end. All this stuff are here, like, those boards. People enter this code, or I enter myself, and all those are like members, right? With all the input that we get from the front end. So this is the front end. All of those marks here are stuff that someone actually added a bug, or it's a bug that is already fixed, or it's a bug that is missing something. And the way that it works is, let's say I just I want to add a bug for this. And then I say, oh, this must have real data or something. And then see the screenshot is captured right here, or I can add, attach files too. So this is amazing, man. I love this. I love this. Look, that is like 105 done here. And without this into like emails or Slack, this would take like forever to have it done.
Yeah,
And grabs also, let me grab one of those here too. Like you say, I see information here about the operating system, the resolution that is using, the element, the specific element. It makes so much easier, Josh, to fix stuff. Having discussions by email or by chat or by something like that.
Is that like a Chrome extension, or do you drop a bit of JavaScript?
Yeah, it's a Chrome extension right here.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. You could have both. You could have a piece of JavaScript too, but we are using the Chrome extension. I love this, man. And you can have feedback from people that are actually not members here. You can filter by stuff. You can create your own columns here, ready to go live or whatever you want to do it,
Yeah.
I highly recommend you guys using this, man. If you're doing front-end stuff, this works.
I had a client recently that said, this isn't working. And no reference to what form, what page. It was just like a super generic ticket they made.
So when I go to a thing like this, you see, I can click here and I go directly to whatever they say that they want me to fix.
Yeah.
Cool. It's like Bugzilla for your browser.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this, man. All my clients, I'm actually make them work with this.
Yeah,
because it's so much faster for both of you.
Easier for both of you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not that expensive, I think it's like $25 or something like that for 5 people, something like that.
Okay.
See you.
Awesome. All right. So I think the last part here, I just want to run this raffle and also maybe chat a bit about the upcoming things in PHP. I know I'm seeing a lot of Reddit posts in the PHP subreddit about PHP 8 and the just-in-time compiler. I'm seeing mixed results, whether that's actually going to boost performance or not. But I think regardless, PHP 8 and the JIT compiler is going to be a good move forward for PHP. But also just, with the, Symfony and Laravel upgrades recently, I'd love if we had somebody do a talk on any new features in any of those frameworks. So if anybody's interested in doing a talk on that, please reach out to me. I think we do have 2 talks lined up for next week. I think Alex is going to do one on. Can you remind me, Cody, what he was saying?
Integrating PHP with like Alexa, Google Assistant, those kinds of things.
Okay, like voice assistant sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then I think I conned you into doing a talk too, didn't I?
Yes, you want me to do basically what is DevOps.
Yeah, like a DevOps 101 sort of talk. Yeah.
Yep.
Does everybody think those are great topics, or does anybody else have any topics like?
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Sounds good. Then those will be next month's talks in what is it? August, right? And so today we've got the 2 prizes to give away. We've got the 1-month Symphony Cast membership. If you haven't seen Symphony Cast, anybody who's interested in Symphony development, and actually they cover not only Symphony stuff, but they've been covering some JavaScript stuff that's been pretty good lately too. And even some like external APIs like Stripe and other things that may interest you just outside of Symphony in general. All of the content in Symphony Cast is free except the videos. The only way to see the videos is to actually be a member. But if you wanted to just like read the content, you can, but you can't like download any of the examples or watch the videos. So the 1-month subscription gives you access to all of that. And then we also got the 1-year PHP Storm license. So if you are interested in joining the raffle, can you go into the chat, which is in the bottom left here? You click that little kind of chat window icon looking thing there, and just say yes. I'll enter you into the raffle here. Lewis, Manny. Who else? Cody, want to get in on this?
Sure, why not?
I'd love to hear if anybody has any experience with how HHVM has forked away from PHP, or how Hack has forked away from PHP. I have a Hack project I'm working on that. It seems like they've kind of moved away from the PHP code base in the recent versions. So I don't know if that's something anybody's interested in or not.
Yeah,
I saw a guy from Facebook gave a talk on this. I think I can share the link with you, because this is what Facebook's using, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I saw a presentation on that. I can try to find the link for you, and I give to Josh.
Yeah. If you wanted to do a talk on that, that would be great. But I have a feeling that a lot of people have migrated back to PHP who were using the HHVM. Back in the 5-6 days and stuff of PHP, HHVM was blowing away native PHP for a while there. And only until PHP 7 came out, when they completely rewrote the way that the C and Zend engine works with handling PHP types, really boosting the performance there, getting it up to par with HHVM, I think made a lot of people jump ship from HHVM. So I think Hack and HHVM seems to me like it's, there probably are some use cases for it, because I know it does offer some features that PHP just simply can't do because of the way that it does some asynchronous stuff. Can't think of it off the top of my head, but there are some of those features coming out in these new versions of PHP now that you can have kind of the overall community support of using PHP 7 plus than using kind of whatever Facebook's doing with Hack to kind of appease their own needs, and yeah, so I'm not sure how how that language is really doing recently, and be interesting to kind of get an update on that though.
Yeah, it really seems like it hard forked away from PHP in the latest version. It took quite a bit for me to get Hack to run I had to run some legacy PHP stuff just to get it to run. So I just don't know if 8 is going to be as efficient as Hack is, because Hack is nearly instantaneous. I mean, it basically compiles it as C++, so it runs at the compiler level. And I don't know if the new JIT VM is going to be as efficient as what Hack is doing. If it is, I'll probably go back to 8, but for now it's Hack, I guess, for me.
Yeah, there is a framework called Falcon that I recommend taking a look at. I think Falcon uses some, it's spelled with a PH, but has everything in PHP, but that's tongue in cheek. But Falcon, I think, uses some C++ stuff or C stuff under the hood that makes it really fast, but it still uses PHP, so you're not like kind of diverging into Hack or something like that. But that'd be something else to take a look at if you're really looking for performance.
Yeah, just a heads up with Falcon is it's actually a C extension of PHP, and their whole idea is that it is a framework that you compile down, and then you just write your chain or your glue code so that you're gluing your functions to the framework, and then the framework operates off of your what do you call it, your functions and stuff. So it is super fast, but it's also a pain in the ass because every time there's a new version of it, you have to go and compile it and then re-put it back into your Docker container or on your server, however you're deploying it.
Gotcha.
Similar to what you have to do with Hack to get it to run, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So same thing.
Okay, I think we got everybody in the drawing here. So it looks like everybody's got pretty good odds for winning tonight. Zoom in a bit here. Go ahead and run it. Start. So our first winner will get a selection of the 2 prizes. And Devin, congratulations, buddy. What sounds good, the Symphony Cast membership or the PHP Storm? Which one? The Symphony Cast? Okay, I got you, buddy. You're Devin Hayden, right? Just to double check. It's not a different Devin, right? Okay. Can you just drop your email? It doesn't have to. Oh, yeah. Okay, it is you. All right. Cool. All right. Let me take you out of here, and then I'll run it one more time. So now it's by the way, you didn't hear from me, but you can use this JetBrains license for other products that JetBrains offers. But we like to obviously steer you towards PHP Storm. So the PHP Storm license from our awesome sponsors at JetBrains goes to, hey, Cody, congratulations.
Yes.
Nice. So,
that's my favorite prize.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, it costs a lot, especially for the IntelliJ license.
Oh, the PHP Elephant is my favorite license.
All right, congratulations, everybody. And I really appreciate everybody coming out. If you do want to spread the word, we are going to post this recording to our YouTube. So I'll be sure to post all of that in the meetup.com. Feel free to share that with anybody else that you think would be interested. And definitely I'll RSVP for the next one. And, we'll see you all there. I really appreciate everybody coming out. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for live streaming this.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Josh.
See ya. Thanks, Manny. Appreciate you, man.
You guys.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let me leave.